The sun poured gold over Manhattan Beach that afternoon, the kind of warmth that makes your skin tingle and your bones forget winter. It was August 12th, 1995, one of those city summer days where the wind off the Atlantic made the skyline feel like a different world. The boardwalk was loud with music, families, the smell of fried dough and salt water, the kind of day that seemed too bright for anything bad to happen. Leah sat on a blanket, legs tucked under her, sketching the waves. She liked sketching water. It moved like sign language. Her hands moved in short bursts, pausing only to brush sand off the corner of her paper. She was 19, home from college for the summer. Deaf since birth, Leah didn't speak with words, but her presence carried a quiet gravity, the kind of silence you felt, not heard. Her little brother Jacob, only 14 at the time, was nearby, gangly, sunburned, always chasing something. That day, it was a bag of lemon Italian ice from the vendor up the boardwalk. "Stay put," he had signed, half joking, as he ran backwards. Leah rolled her eyes and flicked her hand, a lazy sign for go. It was maybe 10 minutes, 15 at most. He stood in line, sweating, watching seagulls scream over trash cans. The man behind the cart moved slow, counting coins twice. Jacob kept glancing back to where Leah sat. But when he returned, she was gone. Her blanket was there, her sketchbook, a shoe, but no sign of her. He thought she might have gone to the restroom. He waited, then walked around, called her name, not expecting a response, out of habit. By the time an hour passed, the boardwalk lights had flickered on and Leah's things still lay undisturbed, but she hadn't come back. The police were called. Volunteers combed the beach. Divers searched the shoreline. That night, Jacob couldn't sleep. He watched his mom clutch Leah's blanket to her face, sobbing in a language her daughter could never hear. His father paced in circles, blaming everyone, himself, the police, even Jacob, for leaving her alone. 3 days later, Leah's backpack was found miles away, half buried in garbage, near a shuttered warehouse in Red Hook. No blood, no struggle, just the backpack, zipper broken, and one earring tucked inside the side pouch. After that, nothing. No witnesses, no leads, no Leah. Summer ended like a slammed door. School started again. Life tried to pretend it was normal, but there was a hole in it, like a tooth ripped out of the center of a smile. Jacob stopped going to the beach. His mother stopped cooking. His father stopped talking to anyone but detectives. And every year after, August felt heavier, like the sun hadn't quite come back all the way. The silence didn't arrive all at once. It crept in, slow, invisible, like fog. It filled the corners of the house, slipped under doors, curled around the photo frames. It hung thickest in the living room, where Leah's favorite blanket stayed folded on the armrest, untouched for years. After Leah vanished, sound lost its shape in the Feldman home. Jacob stopped playing music. Their father stopped watching the Mets on TV. Their mother, once loud and funny, now whispered, as if Leah might walk through the front door and be startled by her own name. Jacob grew up surrounded by the echo of someone who should have still been there. Her room was left exactly as it was, drawings on the wall, her alarm clock still set to blink, her red scarf slung over the back of her desk chair like she had just stepped out. They didn't touch anything, not because they were preserving it, but because they didn't know what else to do. In those first years, their parents still held on to hope. His father called the precinct weekly, demanding updates. His mother left missing person flyers in post offices, laundromats, community centers, anywhere someone might glance up and remember Leah's face. Jacob tried too. He went to vigils, sat in the background of interviews, told his story over and over again to people who never had answers. But time did what time always does. It stretched. It pulled the urgency out of their grief, leaving behind a long, dull ache. By the time Jacob was in college, his parents had become strangers. His mother started spending hours watching ASL tapes alone in her bedroom. She'd sign to the TV, tears sliding down her cheeks, her hands trembling. Jacob stopped opening the door. His father took the opposite route. He grew hard, brittle, distrustful of everyone. He blamed the world, blamed the system, the city, Jacob himself. And then, as if ashamed of his own helplessness, he shrunk into himself. One winter, Jacob came home to find the living room full of Leah's things. His mother had packed them in boxes. She didn't say why. She just cried the whole time, as if folding pieces of her daughter was the only power she had left. Their father died first. Heart failure. Jacob was 27. Their mother passed 3 years later, quietly in her sleep. Jacob found her still holding one of Leah's old drawings. By then, Jacob had given up on miracles. He lived in a small apartment in Brooklyn, fixed HVAC systems, and avoided long conversations. He didn't believe in closure anymore, or justice. He kept only one photo on his fridge, Leah laughing in the sun, drawing in the sand. He never looked at it too long. It hurt more than it helped. But when the call came 30 years later from a name he didn't recognize and a number he almost didn't answer, Jacob's heart stuttered. The silence had lasted long enough. Jacob Feldman turned 44 in silence. No party, no cake, just a takeout meal in a paper bag and a voicemail from his supervisor asking if he could cover another weekend shift. It suited him. He wasn't the kind of man who needed noise anymore. He lived in a one-bedroom apartment above a corner hardware store in Bay Ridge. The ceiling leaked when it rained, the radiator wheezed in winter, and he didn't mind either. He kept the place clean, almost obsessively. Neatness was control, predictable, the only real order left in his life. He worked long hours repairing HVAC systems. Not glamorous work, but it kept him busy, and busy was better than still. Still gave the past too much room. He didn't talk about Leah anymore, not to coworkers, not to neighbors, not even to the woman at the deli who once asked about the black and white photo he carried in his wallet. The one he always claimed was his cousin. She had brown curls, a crooked smile, and eyes that looked past you. Leah always looked past people, not out of rudeness, but because she saw everything first. Some mornings, Jacob caught himself imagining what she'd look like now. 49, older than him. Would she still draw? Would she have moved away? Would she have forgiven him for leaving her alone that day? Other mornings he told himself she was dead. It was easier that way. It made the ache manageable, contained. And then there were the days in between, days when he forgot the exact shape of her face, and guilt crept in like rust. He'd tried therapy once, sat stiffly on a couch, and answered questions like he was on trial. The therapist asked if he had processed his sister's loss. Jacob asked if she'd ever had to identify someone by their backpack. The session ended early, so he kept going, wake, work, eat, sleep. A man who had rearranged his entire life around absence. He donated to missing persons charities once a year, quietly, anonymously. He kept Leah's journals in a locked box under his bed, unread. He couldn't bear to see her handwriting. It felt like a voice he couldn't hear calling out from the past. Letting go didn't mean forgetting. It just meant not drowning every time the tide came in. Jacob told himself it was okay, that you could move on and still carry something heavy. That pain, like old plumbing, could leak without warning, but that didn't mean you had to live in floodwater. He didn't know it yet, but the past hadn't let go of him. It had simply been waiting, and it was about to knock. Jacob didn't answer unknown numbers. Too many robocalls, too many people asking for things he didn't have. But that morning, something made him pause. The number wasn't local. It came from a line marked restricted. He stared at it, while his eggs cooled on the plate, thumb hovering over the decline button. He was about to send it to voicemail when it rang again. Same number, same silent insistence. He sighed and picked up. "Jacob Feldman?" A woman's voice. Calm, measured, the kind that used your name like punctuation. "Speaking," he said, wary. "My name is Detective Elise Navarro. I'm with the NYPD Cold Case Division, working in coordination with Homeland Security. I need to ask you a few questions regarding your sister." Jacob froze. He hadn't heard the word sister come from a stranger's mouth in over a decade. "What about her?" he said, instantly on edge. "There's been a recent raid," Navarro said, "in Brooklyn. We recovered several items from an abandoned property that was used as a trafficking site. Among them was a backpack with initials burned into the back panel, LF. Jacob's mouth went dry. "Leah Feldman." "The initials match your sister's," Navarro continued, her voice softening. "Inside the bag was a sketchbook, old, water-damaged, but some drawings survived. One of them has a signature. It's hers." Jacob sat down slowly. The kitchen chair creaked beneath him. He didn't speak. He couldn't. Every part of him was screaming, but his body felt heavy, like it wasn't sure if it should move toward hope or brace for more pain. "We're reopening her case, Mr. Feldman," Navarro said gently. "I'd like to meet with you. There's more, but I think it's better said in person." Jacob swallowed, his voice ragged. "Where did you say the bag was found?" "Red Hook, near the shipyard. It's likely it's been moved around over the years. We believe the property has ties to multiple locations up and down the eastern seaboard." He closed his eyes. Red Hook. It was where her backpack was found the first time, 30 years ago. Time didn't move. It circled, like a noose tightening. "I thought she was gone," he whispered. "Everyone did." "There's a chance she isn't," Navarro said. "And if she is, we still owe her the truth." Silence passed between them, not awkward, just wide, like standing on the edge of something vast and terrible. "I'll come in," Jacob said finally. He hung up and sat there long after the line went dead. The eggs on his plate were stone cold, untouched. A fine tremor moved through his hands. It was her. It had to be her. Hope didn't feel like warmth. It felt like grief trying to stand up again. And somewhere deep inside, after 3 decades of rust and silence, something began to stir. Detective Navarro's office was tucked into the back corner of the precinct, far from the noise and movement of the active cases. It smelled faintly of coffee and paper, sterile, unassuming. But on the corkboard behind her desk, dozens of faces stared out, unsolved and unmourned. Jacob recognized the look in her eyes when she gestured for him to sit. It was the same one he used to see on his father's face, tired, steady, and bracing for impact. She didn't waste time. The trafficking ring we're investigating operated up and down the eastern seaboard. We've been tracking it for years, but the structure is deep, old, organized. They targeted vulnerable women, often immigrants, runaways, and those with disabilities, people less likely to be believed, less likely to be reported. Jacob stared at her, jaw tight. "They chose her," he said, "because she was deaf." Navarro nodded slowly. "We believe so, and because she was alone." The weight of it made Jacob's stomach turn. She slid a file across the desk. Inside was a blurry photo. A woman, mid-30s to early 40s, standing behind a chain-link fence. Her face was partially obscured, her eyes downcast, arms thin. "This was taken by a witness in 2018, Navarro said. "The man who took it was a delivery driver. He was dropping off supplies to a private dockyard owned by a now-dismantled shell company. He said the woman helped unload boxes, didn't speak. Communicated with gestures. Always had someone watching her." Jacob leaned closer. The photo was grainy, poor lighting. But something in the woman's posture froze him. A familiar tilt of the shoulders, the way her hands were held close to her chest, like she was ready to sign but had no one to speak to. "Could that be Leah?" Navarro asked. He couldn't answer. His throat was too tight. "It's not confirmed," she added, "but the location, Red Hook, matches. That facility was raided last month. We found documents, surveillance tapes, and the backpack." Jacob felt like he was underwater, hearing everything through a dull hum. It was too much, too late, and somehow still too close. "You're telling me she's been alive this whole time," he said quietly, "and none of us knew?" "I'm telling you there's a possibility," Navarro replied. "And if it's her, she may not be the only one. We think there are others. Some might still be alive. Some might still be inside." Jacob sat back. 30 years of imagined graves, empty birthdays, and failed hope pressed against his chest like a wall. And now, this. "You said she didn't speak," he murmured. "Not at all?" "She didn't need to," Navarro said. "She knew no one would listen." Jacob looked at the photo again, and something inside him cracked. Not pain, not yet, but a sharp, urgent need. He had given up on miracles, but this wasn't a miracle. It was a lead, and he wasn't going to waste it. The next morning, Jacob signed the release forms with a pen that trembled in his hand. A joint task force had been formed. NYPD, Homeland Security, a trafficking nonprofit, and now, him. Not because he was trained, not because he was strong, but because he was the only one left who still knew her. Navarro briefed him in a small conference room where everything smelled like overworn carpet and burnt coffee. Names, photos, routes. Terms like transit safe house, ghost vans, and nonverbal assets were spoken like ordinary things. But Jacob's mind drifted to her hands, to the way she used to sign sunflower with a half smile when she sketched in the yard, to how she'd nudge him with her foot when he wasn't paying attention, to how fast a person could vanish. Afterward, Navarro led him into an evidence room. "Take whatever you need," she said. "Sometimes memory can do what maps can't." He stayed there for hours. There were boxes from the original case, mostly untouched for decades. One was marked simply Feldman, Beach. Inside, damp reports, a sand-filled sneaker, faded Polaroids, missing posters with too bright ink. He ran his finger over Leah's face, staring out from the flyer. "Deaf, last seen 8/12/95. Please contact." Then he found it, an old VHS tape, unmarked except for a sticker with Jacob and Leah, written in their mother's careful handwriting. He didn't hesitate. Found a dusty combo TV VCR shoved into the corner, plugged it in, and pushed the tape inside. The screen flickered. There they were. Two kids in the backyard, Leah, maybe 16, him around 11. She's laughing at him off camera as he tries to stack plastic chairs to make a fort. She taps his shoulder, and he turns. She signs "You're doing it wrong" with a dramatic eye roll. He shouts something back, probably rude, and she flips him off playfully in sign. Their mom laughs from behind the camera. Then Leah turns back to Jacob and signs something slow and deliberate. "I will always protect you." He'd forgotten that. The way she signed it, firm and steady, like she meant it. And now, maybe she'd kept that promise. Maybe she'd spent 30 years protecting other girls. Maybe that's why she stayed behind. Jacob pressed pause. The screen froze on her face, smiling and strong. He leaned back, overwhelmed. The guilt hit him like a second grief. He'd let her disappear twice, once at the beach, and once again when he chose silence over suffering. But not this time. He picked up the flyers, the maps, the witness statements. He didn't know what he was going to find, but he knew where he had to start. Back in the places that never gave them answers, back into the darkness. Because if Leah was still in there, then Jacob was going in after her. The sting went down on a Thursday night. Rain slicked the pavement in streaks of oil and neon, and the rundown motel on the edge of Brooklyn looked like a place time had already condemned. Flickering signage buzzed above doorways, lined with peeling paint and blackout curtains. Jacob sat in the unmarked van beside Navarro and two NYPD officers. A wire coiled around his chest, though he wouldn't be speaking. His job wasn't tactical, it was human. He was there to see, to recognize, to remember. Inside the van, Navarro briefed them quietly. "We have reason to believe a scout for the ring has been using this location to move girls in and out. We don't expect Leah, but any lead is a step closer. If you see anything, anyone you think might be connected, Speak up." Jacob nodded, fists clenched in his lap. The takedown was quick. They moved in through the front and side stairwell simultaneously. Shouts, door kicks, screams, flashlights slicing through the dark. Jacob followed behind, heart hammering against his ribs like it wanted out. The hallway smelled like mildew and cigarette smoke. Broken lives, he thought. This place had soaked up every one of them. Room 214 was the last door breached. Inside they found 3 young women, 2 huddled on a mattress without sheets, the third pacing the corner like a caged animal. She was maybe 20, maybe less. All of them looked like they hadn't eaten in days. Navarro dropped to her knees gently, speaking low and calm. "You're safe now. You're safe. We're here to help." Jacob stood by the door, unsure where to put his hands, unsure if he even had the right to be there. Then the girl in the corner saw him. She froze. Her eyes darted down to his hand. He was holding the worn photo of Leah the task force had printed from the 2018 dockyard sighting. A guess. A whisper of a maybe. The girl stepped forward. She didn't speak. Instead, she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a crumpled photo of her own. She unfolded it slowly and handed it to Jacob. It was grainy, printed on faded thermal paper from a security camera. A woman was sitting on a crate, eating from a bowl. Her face was mostly turned away, but Jacob's heart nearly gave out. The curve of the chin, the hair, the way her hand hovered slightly above the bowl like she was about to sign. "She didn't talk," the girl whispered. "But she helped me. She told me how to get out. Without saying a word, she looked like your picture." Jacob blinked hard. He'd come looking for proof, for pain, for closure. But this was something else, a breadcrumb, a ghost trail. He stepped out into the hallway, photo clutched in his hand like it might disappear if he blinked. "She's out there," he said to Navarro. And for the first time in 3 decades, he truly believed it. Jacob didn't sleep that night. He sat in his dim kitchen, the motel photo spread out on the table beside the one from 1995, the last picture taken of Leah before she disappeared. The resemblance was undeniable now. The girl in the security photo had Leah's posture, the exact slope of her shoulder, the way she turned inward when she wasn't signing. It wasn't proof, but it was more than he'd had in 30 years, and still, it didn't explain why she ended up in a place like that, why no one had seen her, why she hadn't been rescued sooner. The next day, Navarro called him into the precinct. "We dug into the Red Hook warehouse where her backpack was first found," she said. "There's something strange about the ownership history." She laid out old property records, faded printouts, and a scrawled name that made Jacob's stomach twist. David Keller. Jacob knew that name. "Keller was a friend of your father's," Navarro said gently. "We confirmed that they co-owned a small boat repair shop off the canal back in the late 80s. Went under in 92. After that, Keller dropped off the map. No tax filings, no active employment, nothing. But for some reason, he was listed as the leasing agent for the warehouse where Leah's bag turned up." Jacob couldn't breathe for a second. David Keller had been like an uncle to them. He used to bring fireworks on the 4th of July. He'd give Leah sketchbooks for her birthday, taught Jacob how to throw a curveball in the alley behind their old building. He was part of their lives. Jacob remembered him clearly that summer. Keller had been at the beach that week, just for a day, said he was visiting from out of town, staying nearby. He brought sandwiches, laughed with their dad, left early. That had meant nothing until now. Navarro watched his face. "I'm sorry, but we think it's possible he was involved. Maybe not directly, but connected. If we can find him, we might find answers." Jacob stood slowly. The weight of this new truth was unbearable. All this time he'd imagined some stranger in a van, some faceless monster who saw Leah's silence as vulnerability. But what if it wasn't a stranger? What if the danger had been close? Trusted? He felt sick. Back then, his father had obsessed over the case. The guilt, the rage. Was it just grief? Or did he suspect something? "I need to go," Jacob murmured. He left the precinct and walked for miles, past the pier, through old neighborhoods where his childhood still lingered, like ghosts in the windows. Every memory now felt fragile, contaminated. Trust had always been a thin rope, but now it was unraveling. This wasn't just about finding Leah anymore. It was about unearthing everything buried with her, and not all of it would be easy to look at. The beach hadn't changed. That was the strangest part. 3 decades had passed, but the boardwalk still smelled like salt and sunblock. The same fried dough stand still sputtered grease into the air. The same crooked ice cream cart rattled across the wooden planks with a tinny bell that sounded like it hadn't been replaced since the 80s. Jacob stood at the edge of the sand, eyes scanning the shoreline where he last saw Leah. The sun was out, children splashed in the surf, and the ocean rolled in like it didn't know what it had taken. He walked slowly, letting his feet follow muscle memory. There, just beyond the lifeguard tower. That's where their blanket had been. That's where she'd sat with her sketchbook, legs crossed, her hair twisted into a loose bun. That's where she smiled at him as he ran off for Italian ice, signing hurry back with 2 fingers flicking. He never did. He found the old snack vendor still there, older now, white-bearded, face worn like driftwood. Jacob bought a lemonade and asked casually, "Did you work here back in '95? The man studied him, then shrugged. "I've worked this beach since Reagan." Jacob pulled out Leah's missing poster, one of the reprints from the task force. The ink was cleaner now, but her face hadn't aged. She was still 19, still waiting. The vendor squinted, lips pressed into a line. "I remember her," he said finally. "She was always drawing. She'd sit quiet while you were off running around. You were a loud one." Jacob's chest tightened. "Do you remember anything off that day?" The man hesitated. "People talk about that day like it was yesterday," he said. "But the thing is, it wasn't loud, not really. It was just weird. I remember the lifeguard radio cut out for about 10 minutes. Interference. Never figured out why." He pointed toward the dunes. There was a van, I think, gray, parked near the access road where the fence used to be open. Jacob's breath caught. A van? Didn't belong, no plates, just sat there, engine running. Nobody noticed until it was gone, and then, well, then the girl was too. Jacob stared at the horizon. Waves lapped at the sand as if the beach were innocent. "Did anyone hear anything?" The man nodded slowly. One of the teens said they heard a scream, but short, not loud, like someone trying to scream with their mouth covered. Jacob didn't speak. Couldn't, because that's what he imagined. Leah trying to yell, trapped inside the silence she lived in, no one noticing, no one listening. And now, 30 years later, a vendor remembered what Jacob had tried to forget. It had never been an accident. It had been a moment, a choice. A van. He walked away slowly, leaving footprints beside the ones she never made again. The ghosts of this city never left. They just waited. And Jacob was done letting them stay hidden. The warehouse was cold, bare concrete walls, flickering fluorescent lights, the smell of rust and damp. Jacob felt the weight of every second, every step like it was pressing down on him. Somewhere inside, behind layers of fear and silence, was a piece of Leah. They led him down a narrow corridor to a small room where a young woman sat alone. Her eyes were wary, sharp, scanning every corner for threats. She was thin, her clothes worn, but there was a quiet strength in her posture. Jacob swallowed hard. The woman's hands trembled as she reached out when Navarro handed her a notebook and pen. She wrote slowly, laboriously. "You want to know about Leah?" Jacob nodded, unable to speak. She signed a few words, broken, imperfect, like a language half remembered. "Leah helped me." The woman's eyes flicked to Jacob, steady and sure. Then she signed again. "We trapped bad men. Leah, silent but strong. She taught me signs, how to tell when danger comes." Jacob's heart raced. The woman's fingers moved awkwardly but deliberately, Leah stayed to protect. Tears welled in Jacob's eyes. He gripped the edge of the chair as the woman's story unfolded in fragments, escaped from the nightmare, but knowing Leah had stayed behind, choosing to hold the line for others trapped in silence. "She didn't leave," the woman whispered. "She stayed." Jacob thought of the sketchbook, the backpack, the photos. He thought of the little sister who promised to protect him. And now he knew she'd kept that promise, not just to him, but to every girl caught in the ring. The woman's gaze held his, fierce and unyielding. "We're coming," Jacob signed, fingers clumsy but heartfelt. Navarro stepped forward, her voice steady. "We will find her. We will bring her home." For the first time, hope wasn't a fragile whisper. It was a quiet roar growing louder inside him. The warehouse stood silent on the edge of the industrial district, a hulking skeleton of rusted steel and cracked concrete. Its faded sign read, "Harbor Freight Shipping," though the task force already knew the name was a lie. A shell company meant to hide the dark truth beneath. Jacob's boots echoed as he stepped inside, the stale air thick with dust and neglect. Broken crates lay scattered across the floor, and the faint hum of distant city traffic barely filtered through cracked windows high above. Detective Navarro moved beside him, flashlight beam cutting through shadows. This is where the ring ran its operations. Shipping containers were used to smuggle victims in and out, and this was their nerve center. Jacob's heart pounded in his ears as the team spread out. Somewhere in this abandoned place, Leah's story was waiting to be uncovered, buried under years of silence and fear. Near a makeshift desk, Jacob spotted an old VHS player plugged into a battered television. Nearby, a stack of worn videotapes was labeled with dates, locations, a chilling timeline of captivity. He picked up the first tape and inserted it carefully. The screen flickered to life, revealing grainy footage of women, eyes hollow and watchful, moving silently through rooms under heavy guard. Among them, Jacob caught glimpses of hands signing, hurried, desperate, a secret language whispered behind locked doors. Then he noticed a small notebook resting on the desk. Its cover was battered, the leather cracked. Opening it, Jacob saw pages filled with symbols, signs written in a shorthand he'd never seen, but immediately recognized as a personal version of American Sign Language. His fingers traced the loops and strokes, a journal written by Leah herself. Each entry was a fragment, dates, names, places, warnings. She had been recording her world in silence, capturing what words could not say. Jacob's vision blurred as he read a final scrawled note. "Protect the others. I am still here." He swallowed hard, the weight of her courage pressing down on him. Navarro's voice broke through the quiet. "There's more. Forged papers, fake IDs, transit manifests. This wasn't just a hideout. It was a factory for erasing lives." Jacob looked at the pages, at the tapes, at the hollow shell around them. For 30 years, Leah had been trapped in this nightmare, her story hidden in shadows. But now the shadows were lifting. And with every secret uncovered, the path to her and to justice became clearer. The moment Jacob stepped into the small, dimly lit room, his breath caught like it had been snatched away by the sea breeze years ago. There she was, Leah, alive, sitting on a threadbare mattress, her body thin and fragile beneath a faded sweater. Her hair hung in tangled waves, her skin marked by scars that whispered stories Jacob could only imagine. But her eyes, those eyes, were sharp, clear, and unyielding. She looked up. For a heartbeat, she stared at him like he was a ghost, an apparition conjured from the past. Then, slowly, she raised a trembling hand. Her fingers moved carefully, spelling out the word he had longed to hear. Jacob. Tears welled in his eyes, blurring the world around them. He dropped to his knees, unable to form words, his voice trapped behind decades of silence and sorrow. Instead, he reached out, fingers trembling, and traced the familiar shapes in the air. Leah, her lips parted slightly, the ghost of a smile touching the corners of her mouth. She signed back, "I'm here." It was their first conversation in 30 years, and no words were spoken. Around them, the world fell away. Jacob felt the weight of the years, the lost birthdays, the empty holidays, the silent nights, dissolve in the space between their fingers. They sat together, signing slowly, catching up on years filled with shadows. Leah's story spilled out in careful, broken signs. The captivity, the night spent comforting others, the relentless hope that one day someone would find her. Jacob listened, heart breaking and soaring all at once. He promised her she was safe now, that he wouldn't let go, that the family they had lost was waiting to hold her again. She nodded, her eyes shining with something fierce, and fierce alone could survive: resilience. For all the scars, for all the pain, Leah was unbroken. And in that silent reunion, Jacob understood something profound. Love doesn't need words. It lives in the spaces between, in the shapes of hands, in the silent promises kept across a lifetime. They had found each other again, and now finally they could begin to heal. The air was thick with tension as the final raid unfolded in the pre-dawn hours. Jacob stood beside Leah, the same quiet strength they had once shared in silence, now pulsing between them like electricity. Together, they had become more than siblings. They were a force determined to shatter the darkness that had bound so many. The warehouse where the ring operated was grim and labyrinthine, a nightmare carved from concrete and steel. But tonight the cold halls would echo with freedom. Detectives and task force agents moved with precision, their footsteps muffled by shadows. Doors were kicked open, voices shouted commands. Flashlights pierced through the gloom like beacons. Inside, dozens of women were found, some clutching each other, others trembling alone in corners. Many were deaf or nonverbal, their silent worlds trapped behind locked doors and cruel hands. Others were immigrants whose disappearances had never been reported, invisible to a system that failed them. Leah and Jacob moved quietly among them, offering comfort in signed words and gentle touches. Leah's presence was a lifeline. Survivors saw in her the strength to survive, the promise that they too could be saved. One young woman, barely 17, reached out to Leah's hand, signing shakily, "You helped me escape." Leah nodded, eyes misting. Jacob watched, heart swelling with a fierce pride and pain. This was why they fought. In a small, dim room, Jacob found another survivor, an elderly woman with tears streaming silently down her cheeks. She signed, "Thank you. No one heard us before." Jacob's voice broke as he replied, "We hear you now. You're safe." The raid lasted for hours. When dawn finally broke, it painted the sky in soft golds and pinks, a new beginning for those who had lived in shadows for far too long. As the survivors were escorted to safety, Jacob and Leah stood together, the weight of the past balanced by the hope of the future. They had broken the chain. But more than that, they had begun to rebuild lives, restore voices, and bring light to places long buried in silence. For Jacob, for Leah, for every woman freed that day, this was not the end. It was the beginning of healing. The city was suddenly watching. Headlines flashed Jacob and Leah's names in bold type. Siblings bring down trafficking ring. Survivors speak out. A family reunited after 30 years. Reporters crowded outside their modest apartment, microphones thrust forward, questions fired like bullets. Jacob answered politely, carefully. Leah stood beside him, hands folded, eyes distant but steady. The praise was overwhelming. They were hailed as heroes. But inside Jacob a storm raged, because the truth was heavier than the applause. Not every woman was found. Not every nightmare ended in rescue. Some faces remained missing in the crowds. Some families still haunted by silence. Some stories would never have answers. Jacob's nights were restless. He replayed moments, second-guessed decisions, and wrestled with the guilt of survival. What about the ones they never found? What about those who still lived in darkness? Leah, too, carried scars that no spotlight could heal. Together they faced a world that wanted neat endings, but life wasn't tidy. In quiet moments, Jacob would stare out at the city skyline, feeling both victorious and broken. He realized that this fight was far from over, but it had changed him. He had a choice: to retreat into the quiet life he once knew, or to use the pain and hope they had found to fuel a new purpose. The city praised them as saviors. Jacob knew the real work was just beginning. The first rays of morning light slipped gently through the blinds, casting soft shadows across Jacob's worn kitchen table. The quiet hum of the city waking up seeped through the window, a world moving forward, whether he was ready or not. Jacob sat alone, sipping black coffee, the taste bitter but grounding. Across from him lay Leah's journal, pages of shorthand and sketches, a map of pain and resilience. He traced the lines with a finger, as if touching her story could somehow stitch together the fractures time had made. This wasn't the end. It was a beginning. Leah had been found. The trafficking ring dismantled, but the scars ran deeper than anyone could see. For Leah, rebuilding meant rediscovering trust, finding her voice in a world that had silenced her for so long. For Jacob, it meant transforming his grief into action. Together they had faced the worst darkness, and now, together, they would fight for light. Over the following weeks, Jacob met with advocates, law enforcement, and survivors. He lent his voice to campaigns for better protections for people with disabilities, for improved resources for trafficking victims, and for the voiceless who too often slipped through the cracks. Leah began attending therapy sessions tailored for survivors of trauma, her fingers learning to sign emotions she'd buried for decades. Slowly, she returned to the world outside, tentative at first, then with growing strength. Jacob watched her reclaim pieces of herself he thought lost forever. The girl who once promised to protect him was now teaching him how to protect her. They became advocates together, their story a beacon of hope and warning. The city still bore its scars, and so did they, but beneath the weight of pain was a fierce determination to heal, to change what could be changed. One afternoon, standing at the edge of Manhattan Beach, Jacob looked out at the water. The waves lapped gently at the shore, indifferent and eternal. He thought of Leah, of the years lost, of the fight ahead. The sun was rising, a new dawn. He smiled, not because the past was forgotten, but because it no longer defined them. They were survivors, and their journey was far from over.